Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel, and today I'm going to be counting down the top 10 greatest American rock bands of all time. This is a sequel to a video I did last summer here on the channel, counting down my top 10 favorite American metal bands of all time, which if you want to check that video out, I'll leave it linked down below, but figured I'd do the same thing here today for hard rock, and very tough list to make, especially whittling it down to a top 10, but with that said, let's get started here with my number 10. I gotta go with Grand Funk Railroad. They are indeed an American band, and a legendary arena rock band at that. The original trio of Don Brewer, Mark Farner, and Mel Schacher had incredible chemistry together and really helped to define 70s American rock. Also, Homer Simpson's favorite band of all time. Number 9, gonna go with the Eagles, formed in 1971. They're another one of those bands that, you can't talk about rock in the 70s without talking about them. No one sounded quite like the Eagles, accompanied by their incredible songwriting with a bit of a country edge to their sound, and they have a lot more to offer aside from their immensely popular Greatest Hits album. I don't think at all they're a Greatest Hits band, but a lot of fantastic material in their catalog. Again, another one of those essential 70s rock bands coming in at number 9 on the list. Moving now from 70s rock to 90s rock here, I'm going to go with Pearl Jam at number 8, although I'm still kind of mad at them right now for the whole ticket prices thing for our upcoming tour, but, they definitely helped to define Seattle rock with the release of their debut album, 10, and I don't think they made a bad album throughout the entirety of the 90s. In my opinion, their first bad album, if you can even call it that, was Binaural from 2000, but of course, Eddie Vedder has one of those recognizable voices in all of rock, and Mike McCready is one of rock's most underrated guitarists, in my opinion. Just check out his work with Temple of the Dog and Mad Season. And in terms of, grunge bands on this list here, I wanted to put Pearl Jam here on this list. Not a Nirvana fan, and, when it comes to Soundgarden and Alice in Chains, I've always considered them to be more on the metal side of grunge. So, with that in mind, wanted to have some grunge representation here on the list. Coming in at number 8, gotta go with Pearl Jam. Following that up now with my number 7, let's go with the Grateful Dead. Needless to say, the Grateful Dead were one of the 70s most diverse rock bands with a range that pulled from, rock, blues, jazz, folk, country, reggae, gospel, and psychedelic rock as well. Known for their long onstage improvisations, the musicianship on display was top-notch, and, whether you're a Deadhead or not, you gotta admit the Grateful Dead are one of the most important 70s bands of all time and belong in any conversation pertaining to one of the greatest American rock bands ever. So, with that in mind, coming in at number 7, I'm gonna go with the Grateful Dead. For number 6, let's go with the hottest band in the world, Kiss, specifically the original band here of Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, Ace Frehley, and Peter Criss. Maybe not as technically proficient as some of the other bands here, maybe a little rough around the edges, but the original lineup of Kiss are one of my favorite bands of all time. Peter, Ace, Gene, and Paul worked so well together throughout the 70s, and, at their most popular, at the height of their popularity, they were putting out generational work with, the likes of Destroyer and Love Gun, so I'd be remiss not to include them here on this list. One of my personal favorites, gotta go with Kiss at number 6. Moving to the top 5 now with my number 5, let's go with the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Fronted, of course, by Jimi Hendrix, the group was one of psychedelic rock's finest and showcased Hendrix's talents to a much wider audience. Of course, Jimi Hendrix, one of the greatest guitarists of all time, someone who I think was definitely ahead of his time, and we were probably robbed of some of his best work, later on in his life, because of course he passed away at the young age of 27, so, I think there's a lot to be desired there in terms of what he could have done, with his sound over the years, but when it comes to the stuff he did during his career, I think it's the Jimi Hendrix Experience that best defines some of his greatest work. So with that in mind, I wanted to put it in the top 5, and of course had to mention Jimi Hendrix here on this list. So to get us started in the top 5, going to go with the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Let's talk Southern rock here with my number 4. Got to go with Lynyrd Skynyrd, a band that had undergone many lineup changes and different iterations over the years, but 70s Skynyrd helped to popularize Southern rock with anthems like Free Bird, Simple Man, and Sweet Home Alabama, just to name a few. So they left an indelible mark on Southern rock, which I think, Southern rock definitely would have been a very different scene had not been for the influence of a band like Lynyrd Skynyrd, which is why they're my number 4 on the list. Top 3 now, I'm going to go with Aerosmith. This was really the first band that came to mind for this list here. Formed in 1970, the band were able to merge rock and blues together with powerful vocals by Steven Tyler and some signature playing by Joe Perry on guitar. That really put them on the map, of course, with albums like Twice in the Attic and Get Your Wings. The band would then make a comeback into the mainstream with Permanent Vacation in the mid to late 80s, and personally, I think their 90s stuff is their best. That's just, my personal preference, but, I dig all eras of Aerosmith, and, again, like I said, they were the first band that came to mind here, so I had to put them in the top 3 for this countdown. Number 2, going to go with The Doors. Morrison, Krieger, Densmore, and Manzarek. They turned rock on its head with the release of their self-titled debut album because, nobody had really ever heard anything anything like Jim Morrison before, an incredible lyricist with an enigmatic personality that just commanded attention, and the band, didn't have a bad album, I think, during Jim Morrison's lifetime, from their debut through LA Woman. Everything is fantastic, in my opinion. Jim Morrison, an incredible lyricist, a great live performer, depending on when you caught him, if he was in a bad mood, or if he was, unable to perform to the highest level, that was a little different. But, when it comes to the prime era of the Doors, Jim Morrison was an incredible frontman, and I think very underrated were the remaining members of the band, Krieger, Densmore, and Manzarek. Super important to the overall sound of the Doors as well. Before I get to my number one, I do have a handful of honorable mentions here, because again, this list was really hard to make. But that said, honorable mentions go out to Steely Dan, the Alice Cooper Band, the Allman Brothers, ZZ Top, Guns N' Roses, and the Ramones. All fantastic American rock bands. I wanted to include them here on this list, but I could only fit 10 on the countdown here today. Well, speaking of bands that turned rock on its head, Eddie Van Halen recorded the guitar solo for Eruption on Van Halen's self-titled debut album, and rock would never be the same again. So coming in at number one, in my opinion, the greatest American rock band, gotta be Van Halen. Of course, EVH was undoubtedly one of the greatest guitarists of all time, and whether you're a fan of the David Lee Roth era, or the Van Hagar era, or maybe you're crazy and you're a fan of the Gary Cherone era, the best, I think Van Halen absolutely left their mark on American rock, and influenced, of course, countless rock musicians and metal bands that would come in the years to follow, especially aspiring shredder guitarists for years to come, even still to this day. So when it comes down to it, Van Halen had to be at number one here on this list. Incredible catalog. I think the David Lee Roth era and the Sammy Hagar stuff speaks for themselves. Great work there. Personally, I'm more of a Sammy Hagar guy, but I really do enjoy both eras. The Cherone era, not so much. But, when it comes to, their best work, it comes both with David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar, and of course, Eddie Van Halen absolutely shredding on guitar. So that wraps up my list, counting down my top 10 favorite American rock bands of all time, which should be visible right over here. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel down below, turn on the bell for notifications so you don't miss a new upload, and let me know down in the comment section below what are some of your favorite American rock bands of all time. I want to hear from you. And until next time, it's the CD guy, Johnny Z, signing off. Take care, everybody.